The studio lights were warm, but the atmosphere had turned unmistakably cold. The strong, silent type who solves everything with violence, Joy said, her tone sharp, her head tilted slightly as if she had already reached her conclusion. Don't you think Hollywood has had enough of that kind of toxic masculinity? Toxic masculinity, Keanu repeated, lifting an eyebrow just enough to signal both curiosity and disbelief. He paused before answering, choosing his words carefully. Joy, I think you're confusing character archetypes with real-world behavior. The characters I play don't celebrate violence. They struggle with it. They're often forced into impossible situations where violence becomes a last resort, usually to protect someone they care about. That's exactly my point, Joy cut in, her voice rising before he could finish. This whole notion that violence is the answer, that men have to be protectors and women need saving, it's outdated, and frankly, it's harmful. Keanu inhaled slowly. For most of the interview, he had remained calm, diplomatic, almost detached, but something in her interruption, something in the certainty with which he dismissed his explanation, caused that practiced restraint to slip. Joy, he said evenly, with respect, I don't think you've actually watched these films. You're attacking ideas that simply aren't in the movies. You're creating straw man arguments. Straw man arguments, Joy echoed, letting out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't amused, it was dismissive. Sweetheart, I've been in this business longer than you've been famous. I know manipulation when I see it, and these movies manipulate young men into thinking violence is heroic. The word sweetheart landed heavily, like a slap no one could pretend not to hear. Keanu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His posture remained composed, but the shift in his eyes was unmistakable. I'm not your sweetheart, Joy, he said firmly. And I'm not manipulating anyone. These are stories about people facing impossible choices and trying to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. Oh, now you're lecturing me about storytelling, Joy replied, her voice dripping with mock amusement. Let me tell you something about real storytelling. It's about human complexity, not about some brooding man with a gun who grunts his way through 2 hours of explosions. Human complexity, Keanu repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. You mean like reducing an entire career to a caricature without actually engaging with the work? You mean like dismissing entire genres because they don't fit your narrow definition of what qualifies as art? For just a moment, so brief it could have been missed, Joy's smile faltered. I'm not dismissing anything, she said quickly. I'm asking legitimate questions about the kind of content Hollywood keeps pushing on audiences. No, Keanu replied, his voice stronger now, more grounded. You're not asking questions, you're making statements and then demanding I defend myself against accusations that have no basis in reality. You've decided what my movies are about without watching them. You've decided what kind of person I am without knowing me, and now you're upset because I won't play along with your predetermined narrative. The studio audience had gone noticeably quiet. Even the other hosts, usually quick to jump in, seemed uncertain about how, or whether, to intervene. The tension hung thick in the air. Joy straightened in her chair, clearly not expecting this level of pushback from someone she had assumed would remain agreeable. I think you're being awfully defensive, she said, leaning back slightly, for someone who claims his movies have depth. If they're so meaningful, why can't you explain that without getting hostile? Hostile? Keanu repeated, incredulous but still controlled. There was steel in his voice now. Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes insulting my work, my intelligence, and my character. You've made assumptions about my motivations, dismissed every response I've given, and now your tone, policing me for not accepting your disrespect with a smile. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That's not journalism, he continued, that's bullying, with cameras. The word bullying hit Joy like a physical blow. Her face flushed red, and her voice took on a defensive edge familiar to longtime viewers of the show. Bullying, she shot back. Are you seriously accusing me of bullying? I'm doing my job. I'm asking tough questions, questions my audience wants answered. Your audience, Keanu said, leaning forward slightly now, his gaze steady and unflinching. The silence in the studio deepened. Or is it your ego? Joy pressed, leaning forward slightly, her tone sharper now, more personal. Because from where I'm sitting, It seems like you're more interested in proving how clever you are than actually having a conversation." Her laugh followed immediately, bitter and humorless. Whatever remained of professional courtesy evaporated in that moment. "Oh, that's rich," she continued. "The action star is going to lecture me about intellectual honesty. Tell me, Keanu, when was the last time you had an original thought that wasn't written for you by a team of screenwriters?" The insult hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Thick, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. Keanu didn't respond right away. He sat still, hands folded loosely, eyes steady but distant, as if weighing whether the conversation was even worth continuing. The silence stretched long enough to make the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. Even the co-hosts avoided eye contact, sensing the moment had crossed into dangerous territory. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but somehow more powerful. "You know what's interesting, Joy," he said calmly. "You talk a lot about asking tough questions, but you haven't asked me a single genuine question this entire time." Joy opened her mouth to interrupt, but he continued. "You've made statements disguised as questions. You've created narratives and then demanded that I defend myself against them. I've asked you about your career choices." Joy shot back quickly. "About your artistic integrity." "No," Keanu replied evenly. "You've told me my career choices are wrong. You've told me I lack artistic integrity. There's a difference." He leaned forward slightly now, not aggressively, but deliberately. "A real question would be something like, what draws you to action films, or how do you approach developing these characters? But instead, you decided, before I ever opened my mouth, that I'm some mindless musclehead corrupting America's youth. And you want me to either confess to that caricature or defend myself against something I've never claimed to be." The co-hosts were exchanging glances now, their discomfort obvious. The cameras, however, kept rolling, capturing every second of what was rapidly turning into a public dismantling of media tactics in real time. "I think you're being overly sensitive," Joy said, attempting to regain control. Her voice softened, but only slightly. "If you can't handle a little criticism, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye." "Criticism," Keanu repeated slowly. There was something almost dangerous in how calm he sounded now. "Is that what you call this?" he asked. "Because criticism implies you've actually examined the work you're critiquing. You've admitted you haven't seen these films, yet you're confident enough to dismiss them entirely and lecture me about their impact on society. I don't need to watch every explosion fest to understand the genre." Joy snapped, "And there it is," Keanu said, leaning back in his chair. "You don't need to engage with the material to have strong opinions about it. You don't need to understand the themes, the craftsmanship, or the intentions behind the work. You can just dismiss entire categories of human creative expression because they don't align with your personal taste." Joy's voice rose, her composure beginning to crack. "Don't twist my words. I'm talking about responsibility. The responsibility that comes with influence. When you make movies that glorify violence, you have a responsibility to consider the impact. And when you use your platform to spread uninformed opinions as if they're facts." Keanu countered immediately. "What's your responsibility then?" The audience stirred. "When you invite someone onto your show not to understand them, but to tear them down for entertainment." He continued, "What message does that send to your audience about how we should treat each other?" The question landed harder than any insult. For a moment, Joy was speechless. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The practiced rhythm she usually relied on had deserted her, and in that silence Keanu continued, "You talk about influence and responsibility," he said, his voice steady, measured, "but for the last 15 minutes you've demonstrated exactly the kind of toxic behavior you claim to oppose." He paused. "You've been condescending, you've been dismissive, and you've been intellectually dishonest." The studio was completely silent now. No applause, no laughter, no interruptions. Just the sound of cameras recording a moment no one in the room had anticipated, where the interviewee had calmly, methodically, and publicly turned the spotlight back on the interviewer. "You've made assumptions about me and my work," Keanu said steadily, without doing the most basic research that any professional journalist would do. "Now wait just a minute," Joy snapped, her voice sharp with anger. "I've been doing this job for decades. I don't need some Hollywood pretty boy telling me how to be a journalist. There it is again, Keanu replied. This time, there was something almost sad in his voice, less anger, more disappointment. Hollywood pretty boy, you can't engage with my actual arguments, so you resort to personal attacks. You dismiss me based on my appearance and my profession instead of responding to what I'm actually saying. He paused, letting the words sink in. Do you see what you're doing right now? You're proving my point about toxic behavior, while accusing me of promoting it. Joy was clearly flustered now. The sharp, controlled wit she usually wielded with ease seemed to be slipping through her fingers. I'm not attacking you personally, she insisted. I'm questioning your choices, by calling me sweetheart, Keanu said calmly, by questioning my intelligence, by dismissing my profession, and now by calling me a pretty boy. If those aren't personal attacks, then what exactly are they? They're observations, Joy replied weakly. Observations based on what? Keanu asked immediately. You've admitted you haven't watched my recent work. You clearly haven't researched my background or my approach to filmmaking, yet you feel qualified to make sweeping observations about my character and my impact on society. He shook his head slightly. That's not journalism, Joy. That's prejudice. With a microphone. The studio fell completely silent. Even the production crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or allow this extraordinary moment to continue unfolding live. Joy glanced around the table, clearly looking for backup from her co-hosts, but none came. They appeared as stunned as the audience, unwilling, or unable, to step into the wreckage of the conversation. I think, Joy said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled anger, that you're being deliberately difficult and argumentative. Our viewers tune in to see honest conversations, not to watch guests attack the hosts. Keanu's response was swift, calm, and devastating in its simplicity. Joy, I haven't attacked you once, he said. I've responded to your attacks on me. I've questioned your methods and pointed out the inconsistencies in your arguments, but I haven't called you names. I haven't dismissed your profession, and I haven't made assumptions about your character. He looked directly at her. The difference in our behavior here should be obvious to anyone watching. You're being manipulative, Joy accused, though the words lacked the conviction she clearly wanted them to carry. Keanu didn't raise his voice. How am I being manipulative? He asked. By defending myself when you attack me, by asking you to support your claims with evidence, by pointing out when you contradict yourself. He let the question breathe before continuing. If that is manipulation, then what would you call what you've been doing to me for the past 20 minutes? The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. Joy's face cycled rapidly through a series of expressions: anger, confusion, embarrassment, before settling into something that looked almost desperate. She glanced at the teleprompter, then down at her notes, as if searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. I think we need to move on, she said at last, her voice strained. Let's talk about your personal life. You've been very private over the years. Some people say that's because you're hiding something. Care to comment? The audacity of the pivot was breathtaking. The audience murmured softly, sensing the shift for what it was. Not a new topic, but a retreat disguised as curiosity. Keanu stared at her for a long moment. The silence felt heavy, deliberate, charged. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire studio. Joy, he said quietly, do you hear yourself right now? He leaned forward slightly, his expression not angry, but deeply serious. You just accused me of being manipulative, for defending myself, and when that didn't work, you immediately tried to redirect the conversation to my personal life, implying I'm hiding something. He shook his head again. That's not a conversation, that's deflection. The cameras kept rolling. You talk about honesty, Keanu continued, but honesty requires good faith. It requires listening. It requires engaging with what someone is actually saying instead of attacking who you think they are. He met her gaze. I came here to talk about my work, about storytelling, about art and responsibility, but instead, you decided who I was before I spoke, and you've been trying to force me into that box ever since. The studio remained utterly silent. And now, he added, when your narrative isn't holding up, you're reaching for insinuation instead of substance. Joy opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since the interview began, she had nothing ready to say. And your response, Keanu continued steadily, is to make an even more personal and completely baseless accusation. You're suggesting that I'm hiding something criminal or shameful simply because I choose not to share every detail of my private life with strangers. That's not what I said. Joy protested quickly, but her voice lacked the confidence it once had. It's exactly what you implied, and you know it, Keanu replied. You said some people say as if that gives you permission to repeat gossip and innuendo without taking responsibility for it. That's not journalism, Joy. That's tabloid manipulation. Joy's co-host Whoopi shifted uncomfortably and finally tried to step in. Maybe we should take a quick break. No, Keanu said firmly, never taking his eyes off Joy. His tone was calm but unyielding. I think the audience deserves to see how this conversation ends. Joy started something here, and I think she should finish it. The studio froze. You wanted to have a tough conversation about responsibility and influence, he continued, so let's have it. Let's talk about the responsibility that comes with your platform. Joy seemed to realize she was trapped. Every path forward only exposed more of what she had been trying to hide beneath sarcasm and authority. I don't know what you want from me, she said at last, and for the first time since the interview began, her voice sounded genuinely uncertain. I want you to acknowledge what you've done here today, Keanu replied calmly. I want you to admit that you invited me on this show not to have an honest conversation, but to tear me down for entertainment. I want you to acknowledge that for the past 25 minutes, you've demonstrated exactly the kind of toxic behavior you claim to be against. I was doing my job. Joy said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Is your job to bully guests? Keanu asked evenly. Is your job to make unfounded accusations? Is your job to attack people personally when they don't respond the way you want them to? His voice never rose, but each question landed like a precision strike. Because if that is your job, he continued, then maybe you should ask yourself whether that job is worth doing. Joy's face was flushed now, her composure completely shattered. You don't get to come on my show and tell me how to do my job, she snapped. Your show? Keanu raised an eyebrow slightly. I thought this was the View, not the Joy Behar Power Trip Hour. A murmur rippled through the audience. And I'm not telling you how to do your job, he added. I'm pointing out that what you've been doing today isn't journalism. It's performance art, designed to make you feel superior at someone else's expense. That's enough, Joy shouted, her voice rising nearly to a yell. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. No, Keanu agreed calmly. You don't. The sudden agreement seemed to catch her off guard. You could apologize, he said. You could acknowledge that you behaved unprofessionally. You could admit that you made assumptions about me, and attacked me based on those assumptions instead of facts. You could demonstrate the kind of integrity you claim to value. Joy stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as if she were searching for words that refused to come. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of studio equipment and the whispers of a stunned audience. Or, Keanu continued gently but firmly, you could continue to demonstrate that when someone calls you out on your behavior, your response is to double down and become even more hostile. He met her eyes. The choice is yours, Joy, but whatever you choose, everyone watching will see exactly who you really are. The words hit her like a physical blow. Joy looked around the studio, at her co-hosts, at the cameras, at the audience, as if only now realizing that this moment of exposure was being broadcast live to millions of people. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. I don't, she began, then stopped. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who makes a living pretending to be other people. There it is again, Keanu said softly. And now there was almost compassion in his voice. When you can't defend your actions, you attack the person pointing them out. When you can't engage with the substance of what I'm saying, you try to diminish me by dismissing my profession. He tilted his head slightly. Do you see the pattern, Joy? Do you understand what you're doing? Joy suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't have to tolerate this kind of disrespect on my own show, she declared. What disrespect? Keanu asked, remaining seated, his voice calm and steady. I haven't called you names. I haven't made assumptions about your character. I've simply held up a mirror and shown you your own behavior. He paused. If you find that disrespectful, maybe the problem isn't with the mirror. Joy was backing away from the table now, her microphone still clipped to her blouse, her movements stiff and uncoordinated. "This interview is over," she said sharply. "The interview was over the moment you decided to attack me instead of having a conversation," Keanu replied quietly. The cameras kept rolling, and in that moment, the power dynamic had completely reversed, not through shouting, not through insults, but through calm, relentless accountability.